What are the talks of the Gaza ceasefire? Nada. No possibility.
The U.S. role in blocking a UN ceasefire resolution is absolutely unforgivable. I want to speak to the massacre now taking place before our eyes in Gaza. I speak as someone who deplores violence in all its forms and condemns violence against civilians of any nation. The war crimes being perpetrated by Netanyahu against Palestinians, however, are in a league of their own and have reached genocidal proportions, with Palestinians denied food, water, medicine, and electricity, while being relentlessly bombed as they're forced to flee their homes, running for their lives. President Biden and bipartisan leaders are not only complicit, they are full partners in Netanyahu's war crimes, supplying the bombs raining down on Gaza, the airplanes dropping them, the aircraft carriers defending the Israeli military, $10 million a day to strengthen the IDF, and propaganda to run political interference. The U.S. role in blocking a UN ceasefire resolution is absolutely unforgivable. We call for an investigation of the Netanyahu regime's war crimes, as well as the role of Biden and U.S. leaders in aiding and abetting them. And above all, these crimes must stop now. As a Jew who grew up just after the Holocaust, with relatives who fled pogroms and a grandfather named Israel, I take never again seriously, and that means never again for anyone. For all those reasons, we demand a ceasefire, an end to the blockade, humanitarian and medical relief, release of hostages and political prisoners, and an end to occupation and apartheid. This is the only path to peace and security for us all.
I'm voting for Jill Stein for peace and security.
Shouldn't a ceasefire be declared immediately to stop all this? Because I understand pursuing a legitimate goal could be to ensure Israel's security, could be dismantling the military capacity of Hamas. But what Israel is doing is not that. What Israel is doing is punishing an entire Palestinian population for what Hamas has done. This is not self-defense, surely not under international law.
I'm voting for Jill Stein because what Biden has done is unforgivable.
Please share the link to this video with everyone.
Even subscribing to this channel helps.
Welcome to this press briefing by Ms. Francesca Albanese, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I start this press conference as the situation continues to tragically deteriorate across the occupied Palestinian territory. The trauma and destruction is unspeakable, and the inferno that the Gaza people are in right now is a stain on all of us, on all UN member states, especially those who have the power to stop it and do not do it. Amidst an intensified siege of Gaza, depriving the population of life-sustaining supplies, this has become a tool of war, exposing the population to inescapable risks of death. These are also war crimes and may amount to crimes against humanity, because this is what international starvation is in international humanitarian law. These crimes also have to be accounted for. Nothing can justify the deliberate toll inflicted on civilians, both Israelis and Palestinians, that we have been witnessing. And considering the abyss we are descending into, and we might still have the power to save ourselves and to save the Palestinians and Israelis from, it is imperative to comprehend how we got to October 7 and the horrors that unfolded since then. As the United Nations Secretary General said yesterday, the 7th of October did not happen in a vacuum, but in the context of 56 years of suffocating occupation Israel has imposed on the Palestinian people. This occupation is unlawful under international law because it has served as a vehicle to violate international law, because the building of colonies, confiscating land, and brutalizing the Palestinian population is a war crime in and of itself. The current reality epitomizes the epic failure of the international community to promote peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians, premised upon international law. the end of Israel's 56-year-old occupation and the realization of Palestinian self-determination and freedom. The report I presented yesterday to the General Assembly contains elements to understand what led to the current crisis. Nothing of this should be, of course, read as condoning or justifying the murderous acts against Israeli civilians. My report focused on the impact of Israeli settler colonial occupation on generations of children in the occupied Palestinian territory and what remains of their right to live in safety and dignity beyond mere survival. I've looked at the figures of the Palestinian children killed, injured, maimed, orphaned, made homeless, deprived of school and any opportunity to enjoy life amidst violence, constant indignities and humiliation. And I've described this experience as unchilding. The expression is not mine, comes from a scholar, Nadera Shahub-Kevorkian, who has described unchilding as that experience of depriving the child of the lightness of childhood, burdening the children with the responsibilities that no child should bear, the responsibilities and pain. Palestinian children's lives are punctuated by eruptive and structural violence in segregated spaces and hostility-stricken communities. The family's livelihood, access to employment, healthcare, opportunities for leisure, future prospects and mobility are all controlled, restricted, and often negated by the Israeli occupation. Palestinian children are aware of the challenges they face as Palestinians, and they ask, why it's so? Are we less human? Are we less worthy? And we need to remember a statement by an Israeli occupation lieutenant who asserted last May that the number of Palestinian children incidentally killed during operations aimed at eliminating terrorists is irrelevant. Portraying Palestinian children and their parents as terrorists and human shields is very frequent in Israeli rhetoric, but this is only used to justify the indiscriminate killing, and it's extremely dehumanizing. And unfortunately, it's being amplified in Western discourse. Do I still have a few minutes? Lethal attacks on Palestinians by Israeli soldiers and armed settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the methodical military assaults against Gaza epitomize the daily hardship endured by generations of Palestinian children. From 2008, when the United Nations started to consolidate the figures, 1,534 Palestinian children had been killed. This is before the 7th of October, with 32,175 injured at the hands primarily of Israeli occupation forces. Of these, 1,025 were killed in Gaza alone since 2007. During the same time frame, 25 Israeli kids were also killed and 524 were injured. On average, 600 Palestinian children are reported to be detained by Israeli occupation forces each year. 13,000 Palestinian children have been arrested, interrogated, and brutally detained since 2000, with mistreated, often amounting to torture, being one feature of their carceral experience. When Palestinian children are not killed, maimed, or detained, they bear witness to the confiscation of family land, expropriation of resources, discriminatory distribution of land and water to the advantage of Israeli settlers, the fragmentation of their communities and families, the destruction of their homes and life-saving infrastructure, and attacks on their education, including the manipulation of the school curricula to wash away their culture and history. The continuous exposure to this violence, to death, to racial discrimination results in high level of psychological, physical distress, which impedes their full and healthy development. The deterioration of human rights and life in the occupied Palestinian territory lies on the responsibility of the international community that once again has failed to uphold international law as the force to reorient politics in the occupied Palestinian territory. And yesterday, I called on the international community, including the International Criminal Court, to end the cycle of impunity and bring justice to all perpetrators of all alleged crimes committed in connection with the 56-year-long occupation. I once again remember the United Nations to use all measures offered by the UN Charter to bring Israel's action in compliance with international law, which includes refraining from contributing to or endorsing Israel's unlawful occupation and the unlawful practices arising thereof. I do think that the political process has failed for many reasons. And I keep on saying the taking of land, because while the peace process was ongoing, Israel was continuing to build colonies. I mean, they have grown in the hundreds since the peace process. How can they ever be admissible and conducive to the realization of an independent Palestinian state, because each colony epitomizes violence in and of itself. But I have always said the freedom of anyone should be a precondition for negotiation. And the continuous violation that Israel has been allowed to live with, and again, the construction of the colonies is the most prominent for me. It has gone on and on for decades, including while Israel and the Palestinians were negotiating. So I understand that you seem to put the blame on the Palestinians for having refused to accept the situation, but how can a peace process be even considered credible when there is no basic respect for human life and the possibility to live as a collective in a given territory? And again, for me, the colonization of the occupied territory is the most striking example, which is of apocalyptic dimensions in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been at the heart of the disagreements for the conclusion of the peace negotiation, because I understand that Israel's attachment to Jerusalem, but there is also Palestinians' attachment. And I say, so can we resolve this in accordance with international law as a balancing act? And so I think that this is the main obstacle. Shouldn't a ceasefire be declared immediately to stop all this? Because I understand pursuing a legitimate goal could be to ensure Israel's security, could be dismantling the military capacity of Hamas. But what Israel is doing is not that. What Israel is doing is punishing an entire Palestinian population for what Hamas has done. This is not self-defense, surely not under international law. And again, the humanitarian aid that I'm desperately invoking for would be supervised by the United Nations. Why can't the multilateral system have a role to play in this situation? An entire population is paying for what Hamas has done. And by the way, just a few months ago, Israeli leaders were reported saying that Hamas was an asset to Israel. Just a few months ago, Hamas was an asset while the Palestinian Authority was a liability. And why so? Because the Palestinian Authority is seen as the only credible actor that the international community would rely upon for the resumption of the peace process. So I wonder, what does it mean that Hamas is an asset? Was it an asset 2 months ago? How has it changed as of the 7th of October? There is a commission of inquiry who's investigating. And I really hope, in the interest of the Israeli people, especially those who have been so fiercely affected physically and morally by the events of the 7th of October, I truly hope that the Israeli government will cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry, because so many people in Israel are asking us, human rights actors, to be close to them in this critical moment, including the Commission of Inquiry.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I know that special rapporteurs have to present their reports to the member state involved and receive comments before they present to the General Assembly. Is that correct? Have you had interaction with the Israeli government about your report? And what has been the reaction on it so far?
Well, the Israeli government doesn't recognize this mandate. And therefore, it has never, as far as I know, it has never provided comments on any reports produced by special rapporteurs. But I have to say, until 2007, there was a different engagement by Israeli authorities, because at least until 2007, special rapporteurs were allowed into the country. In 2007, a special rapporteur was arrested, which is incredible because it was a clear violation of UN privileges and immunities. And so he was detained at the airport for over a day or two and then deported, basically. No, there has been no, I've tried to establish contact with the Israeli government and it has not happened. On the other hand, I have many contacts with various groups, not just the usual suspects. They could be for some like human rights organizations, but also Israeli individuals. And this is very helpful for me because it really allows me in a very polarized, in a very, very tense situation. It allows me to understand how Israelis perceive it. And trust me, it's not obvious.
Can you please talk a little more on the Israelis you talk to and what their views on all these things are?
Sure. Look, I'm afraid that the 7th of October have changed a lot. And I'm really sorry to say that, but the Israelis I'm talking to are naturally shaken. I mean, it's very difficult for them because they were personally affected. Some of the hostages include human rights, people who are close to human rights organizations. So you cannot expect people to hold the professional opinions and elevate it above their personal tragedies. Certainly not I. But at the same time, I recognized that many of them are making a huge effort in trying not to justify at all. And they condemn fiercely, of course, what Hamas has done. But at the same time, they bring us back to the context. Many of them, and they are very courageous, because I also understand there is a lot of pressure on everyone right now. There are Palestinians. I do not have the capacity, as you know, I do not have the mandate to investigate what happens inside Israel. But I do hear the call of those who are exposed to violence that is being unleashed, including against Israeli citizens. Palestinians with Israeli citizenship have been threatened, and also Israelis who have dared standing in solidarity with them. So the situation is very, very tense. It was tense before the 7th of October. Look, I'm really, like anyone involved in this, I don't like calling it conflict, but anyone involved in this critical situation with Israel and the Palestinians, I do see how these two people could live together. I do. Now it's more difficult. But after all what's happening, I really cannot imagine how the people will recover. And this is why I think that it's absolutely imperative that the international community, instead of acting in warmongering, engaging in warmongering, could stay even-handed and act with wisdom to support both the Palestinians and the Israelis in this critical situation.